give a big round of applause as we welcome onto the stage the chairman of SANEF, that's Ngalwa.
Good evening, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a beautiful night tonight, and all of you are looking good, I must say. I was given an opportunity to use the teleprompter, but I thought I can't not be in control. I mean, I already have a mistrust of technology, and I think you saw how AI actually is threatening journalism, but also is disrupting other industries as well. Of course, there are other good things about it as well. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just a great night because we are celebrating the best and the brightest among us as journalists, but also because we have in fact, I would say that this is probably the biggest events award that we've had in a while. I mean, not only have we had the highest number of entries, but I'm not here to talk about that. We do have the convener of judges who will talk about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I will do tonight actually is to tell you a story of a young lady who one morning took a tram, and it was in December 1957, and she was to start her job as a cadet reporter at the then Golden City Post. A few years later, she joined the legendary Drum magazine, and where, in her own words, it was where she found her wings. And through her reporting, she became an activist against apartheid and fought for social and political inclusion. It was therefore inevitable, ladies and gentlemen, that she would find herself covering a lot of stories that had to do with the various laws that were unjust, and one of those laws was the Immorality Act. And I think all of us know that actually that law prohibited relationships between white persons and persons of other races. So it happened that in 1966, she and the legendary photographer Alf Kumalo found themselves in a rather precarious position. And they were told of a man who was in hospital, who had been arrested under the Immorality Act. He was under police guard, and he had a wife, Marty, who was Afrikaans. And what happened is that this young lady, she's not young anymore, this young lady then devised a plan to get this man to escape from the hospital. To cut a long story short, not only did this man escape, but she was able to give him a safe house where he hid for many weeks, or days rather. And then what happened on a particular day in February of that year, 1966, they got into a car with a driver whom they dubbed James Bond, and drove all the way to Barberton. Now, Barberton, for those who don't know, is near the Swaziland border. And when they got to Barberton, they were met by a woman who was a community worker. They exchanged pleasantries, not much was done or said, and then the journalist and the driver left this couple, the man named Robert and his wife, Marty. And then a few weeks later, she received a telegram from Babane, Swaziland, which had only 2 words: Operation Successful. This effectively means that this couple, who were lawbreakers according to the Immorality Act, had successfully gone into exile. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you may be wondering as to why I'm telling you this story this morning, or rather this evening. But I'll come back to that point later. But the journalist in question was one Juby Mayet, who died peacefully in 2019 at the age of 82. But before she died, she shared her life story, which is chronicled in the book Freedom Writer, My Life and Times. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud that we will get to present the first Juby Mayet Rising Star of the Year award to a deserving young journalist. You may be wondering why we named a Rising Star award after Chubimaya. Well, she was 19 when she joined the Golden City Post. But ladies and gentlemen, let me go back to this story of this couple who had to cross to Swaziland to escape persecution. It is the story that tells of collaboration between journalists and also community workers in fighting injustices. And Jubi and the journalists of her era had the oppressed majority cheering them on, and they had communities who saw them as allies. But now we live in a time where it's becoming more and more dangerous to be a journalist. It is these very communities that we report on that have turned on journalists and are the first to attack them, despite journalists clearly identifying themselves as reporters. I don't believe this is a coincidence. I think it's part of the disinformation deliberate and the disinformation campaign that is aimed at chipping away at the credibility of journalism and undermining the work that we do. We've got many stories of the struggle against apartheid where communities worked hand in hand with journalists. They understood journalists to be the messengers who were the conveyors, rather, or the conveyor belts, who were sharing those messages to the masses. But today we find ourselves under attack. I know that conspiracy theorists have a number of stories as to why this is the case. But to me, I think it is the corrupt, it is politicians, it is the criminal elements who are driving this wedge between communities and the media. I'll tell you why I say that. Recently, the World Press Freedom Index, which is released every year by Journalists Without Borders, it actually had a paragraph which said that out of the 180 countries that were polled, 118 of them, that is 2/3, the respondents reported that political actors in their countries were often or systematically involved in massive disinformation or propaganda campaigns. The difference is being blurred between true and false, real and artificial, facts and artifices, jeopardizing the right to information. The unprecedented ability to tamper with content is being used to undermine those who embody quality journalism and to weaken journalism itself. So, it is no wonder that today we're meeting under the theme, Journalism in the Face of Public Liability. When seeing is believing, when does the ability to lie end and liability begin? Now, in this country, we have a very important election next year. I think it will probably be the most important election after 1994, of course, because our democracy turns 30. But as journalists, we must expect the attacks to escalate. So as we edge towards that election, we must expect that political leaders will target journalists through disinformation campaigns intended to shift focus away from their shenanigans. And this is exacerbated by the elevated political fever around elections. So, as we continue to expose wrongdoing, as journalists we'll find ourselves in the crosshairs of politicians. You may ask yourselves, what do we do? I would argue that, ladies and gentlemen, we should not stand back. We must understand that fake news and disinformation is not just innocuous sharing of false information. It is much more sinister, and it has the ability to destabilize nations and inflame communities. That is why the battle against fake news is not just for us as journalists, because disinformation actually undermines democracies. So as SANEF, we have a number of initiatives that we have, including workshops and training around elections. But today we had an annual general meeting earlier today, and we took a number of important decisions. But I'll share just one with you. We resolved that we will set up a legal fund that will help journalists fight against these injustices. We will fundraise and allocate funds towards this fund. We'll also be approaching various media houses to talk more about the need for this fund. As you would know, that we have been in and out of court recently. There was the case of the former President Jacob Zuma and Karen Mon, where we had applied to be a friend of the court, and fortunately we were vindicated in our contention that Mr. Zuma was abusing his power in process. In Mpumalanga as well, we are involved in a case of Riot Tlachwayo, who was being sued by the provincial commissioner. It is easy for politicians to attack journalists, but what they should know is that we will not stand back. So, unfortunately, we're also facing another difficulty. We're seeing actually that the courts are becoming more and more hostile. Time and again, we have to go to court to argue why journalists should be allowed in court. It's actually, it's unfathomable that in a democratic South Africa, where everyone understands the basic principles of the law not just being done, but being seen to be done, but you still have judicial officers who stand in the way of journalists doing their job. So in being proactive and being able to arm ourselves and also be able to fight against these injustices, it is important for us to all come together and realize that a lot is at stake, ladies and gentlemen. So I believe that we have a lot of work to do. Tonight we're celebrating the best journalists in this country, and we're celebrating their work, but not everyone is happy with that work. That is why, if the lies are left unchallenged, that becomes the only record. I know that sometimes you get attacked on Twitter, it's like, no, I will not swim in that sewer, but the reality is that we have to correct the public record. At the very least, we need to push back against those. So, in line with this year's theme, we should not only challenge those who disseminate disinformation, but we should also make sure that they take responsibility for the damage that they are causing to our profession and our young democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good night. I thank you.